Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. So my name is Kevin Petrie. I'm the head of research here at Eckerson Group. We're a boutique research and consulting firm focused on data analytics. We help large and mid-sized enterprises build data strategies and execute on them in order to realize more value from their data. Very pleased to be joining Lewis Wynne-Jones, VP of Product at ThinkDataWorks, in order to explore a topic that is becoming more and more important to a lot of the enterprises that we work with and hear from, which is the role of the catalog in data governance programs. Lewis, why don't I let you introduce yourself briefly?
Thanks, Kevin. Hi, my name is Lewis Wynne-Jones. As Kevin mentioned, I'm the VP of Product here at ThinkDataWorks. We're a company that sort of grew out of the open data movement, which was sort of this idea that there was lots of available data in the world and no good way to manage it all. And in the years since we sort of came into the market, we've built a pretty powerful data catalog solution. We've watched the market really adapt to the changes, both from governance and innovation that are required in the space. So excited today to be here and speak with Kevin and sort of continue the conversation about how data catalogs can sort of augment existing data governance policies.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to kick things off and provide some industry perspective based on the work we do with enterprises from a consulting perspective, and also a lot of the research that we write working with various with vendors that have solutions to offer in this space. So I was an economics minor, so if you'll humor me for a moment, I like to sometimes frame things in terms of economic models. What's fascinating about data right now and data engineering and data pipelines, all types of data management, is that there's a boom in supply and a boom in demand. We all know that the supply of data continues to rise quite a bit thanks to digital transformation, which only accelerated in the 2020s for the reasons we all understand related to COVID. As a result, more and more business interactions through mobile devices, handhelds, through all types of digital platforms are taking digital electronic form as opposed to in-person analog form. And as a result, the volume of data is increasing, the variety of data, multi-structured data of all types is increasing. And the velocity is as well, because data is being created very quickly to capture real-time interactions and transactions. There's an expectation that it needs to be consumed quickly as well, which brings us to the right side of the ledger here, demand. The number of users continues to increase, as well as applications and devices. And a lot of this is driven by, as I said before, the digital transformation trends and initiatives are putting more and more customers, partners, employees, suppliers online. So there are a lot more stakeholders that are consuming data in order to make decisions, in order to take actions. There are also, within an organization, there's a data democratization movement in which enterprises are empowering more and more business owners to factor data, basic or even advanced analytics into the decisions they make. The number of applications, as organizations move to the cloud, they're adopting a lot of S applications or even custom applications. And there's also a proliferation of devices in terms of the numbers and types as well. So as a result, data teams have a lot of data at their hands. They need to organize it, make sense of it. They need to find data assets. It might be raw data files. It might be refined data products. Could be a lot of things in between. It could also be analytical outputs. Another critical piece here is to certify data, to validate that it's ready for use, that it's meeting some standard criteria. Obviously, a rising portion of users need to consume that data, and through it all, enterprises need to maintain some level of control. So as enterprises digitize, they need to reconcile this booming supply, booming demand of data, and the catalog is going to play a big role as we talk about that. So let's move to the next slide. Okay, so the data catalog can help. This graphic and framework comes courtesy of a colleague of mine, Joe Hillary, in some of the research. We've actually published a lot on this topic. The data catalog extracts metadata of various types from data sources in order to help data stewards, data curators, various folks who are responsible for the governance of data, the maintenance of it, manage access to the data, certify the data assets and ensure that they are suitable for use, and also flag issues. Data quality continues to be a massive problem. We have a close research partner, BARC, which is the major analytics research firm in Europe. They do an annual survey of folks globally. And what they find over the last 5 years, data quality and MDM have been the #1 priority for organizations, higher than all the new stuff, augmented analytics and so forth. So data quality is a big issue, and data catalogs can help with that, as we'll be talking about. On the right side here, we have the analysts that are going to search for the data. They need to rate and review the data to help their peers consume it more responsibly and more intelligently as well. So the modern data catalog is going to serve as a platform that consolidates metadata that's going to help describe data structures, schema, and so forth, lineage, start to finish, who touched that data and what changes happened along the way, and also its relevance, its suitability for use. It's going to help stewards organize, certify, and control the data assets, stewards acting on behalf of the central governance authority, and it's going to help analysts consume the data. They can find, they can rate it, they can help their peers consume it more intelligently as well. So the catalog is really serving as a central point, a nexus for data sources, data stewards, and data analysts. So we can go to the next slide. And this is a comprehensive view of governance, this wheel here, from some colleagues we have on the consulting side, Sean Hewitt and Josh Freed. And what you can see is that in the middle, we have policies and standards that need to be promulgated throughout an organization. Governance is really about defining permissible use of data and then enforcing the policies and the rules associated with that. It takes and proliferates through many different activities and work streams. You've got data document and content management. You've got data operations management, and I'll talk more about that in particular, data ops, data access management, ensuring that only authenticated users have the ability to only perform authorized tasks, data quality management, obviously ensuring that data is accurate, timely, complete, consistent, and so forth, and metadata management as well, metadata serving as the glue throughout this. So the modern data catalog is playing a pivotal role here. It's helping organize documents and content. It's helping guide data ops, CI/CD or pipeline development and testing capabilities. It's controlling access to data assets or helping do that. It can also centralize data quality scores and consolidate metadata. So if you go around that wheel, you can see that the catalog is playing a role in all this, and it's providing intelligence to drive governance policies and standards throughout the organization. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so if we look at governance from a process view, we can kind of get past the wheel that'll look at all the possible activities and segments. Governance really involves 5 fundamental steps. And again, I'll credit some folks here on the consulting side. It's about identifying data assets, asking and answering the question, what data do we have? What do we know about it? How is the data used throughout our organization? And where can we reduce the risk associated with that data, perhaps related to accuracy, perhaps related to compliance with regulations that, for example, address handling of personally identifiable information, GDPR in the European Union, and CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, really have some pretty clear rules about how PII can be used. Those are the types of questions that you can start to answer in this identification phase. The next is assigning accountability. Who is accountable for handling this data, for consuming it, and what authority do they have? The next step here is to prescribe. What are the parameters for the proper storage, handling, access, and use of data? So this is a set of steps that governance officers, that data stewards, various members of cross-functional data governance teams need to take as they go through the governance process. And those first 3 in particular depend on, in no small part, the data catalog. Step 4 here is educating and supporting. How do you empower employees to succeed in their data governance roles? And step 5 is to monitor and continuously improve. And those things are actually critical. If you look at catalog adoption, one of the things that we found in our research, we did a survey about a year ago. A lot of folks have a catalog, a lot more plan to implement it soon, but within their organization, they have a long way to go to foster broad adoption and wide use. So there's a real evangelism role, there's an educational role here. So to summarize, the catalogs are empowering governance teams to identify the data assets they have, to assign ownership and accountability, and then prescribe actions to help governance teams. Okay, so I want to drill in on a couple examples here of the expanding role of catalogs as it relates to data governance, data management. And the first one is data observability. I have a report coming out, I think this week, we have a report coming out about data observability. We finished up a CDO tech event related to that in late August. And we define data observability as data quality, ensuring that data is consistent, accurate, timely, complete, and data pipeline performance. So data pipeline performance ensures that pipelines, which are essentially workflows between a source and a target, are delivering data in a timely and reliable fashion. So it'll look at the performance, the utilization, the availability of different infrastructure elements that contribute to pipelines. And it'll also look at the actual flows of data within that to ensure that things are not breaking along the way, either logically or physically. So data observability is going to monitor data quality and data pipeline performance. It's going to help optimize data delivery across distributed architectures for analytics and operations. And there's been a lot of innovation in the data observability space. And Lewis is going to be talking more about what ThinkDataWorks does there. Suffice it to say that as organizations, they've always worried about data quality. There've always been processes and tools to address that for 30 years or more. But what's new now is organizations are dealing with increasingly complex, increasingly cloud-based environments. And that's where data quality, data delivery, and timeliness gets particularly challenging. What's interesting about the data catalog is that it can serve as both a source and a target of metadata for data observability. So a lot of the outputs of data observability are going to be scores related to accuracy, suitability, and so forth. The data catalog is a natural repository for that because you can help data engineers, data analysts, various consumers, data stewards, assess the suitability and the accuracy of assets. Now it can also be, the catalog can in turn help provide inputs to the data observability process, because if you look in and you see that a certain set of streaming data has a certain quality score, a certain history, certain lineage, that can help guide the observability controls that you put in place for next month or next week. So data catalogs are offering a control point for observability of data quality and data pipelines. So we can go to the next slide. And the second sort of case study I want to show, going back to that wheel of all the aspects of data governance, another one is data ops. And arguably observability is a foundation for data ops, but that's a talk for another day. But the data ops discipline is really about applying practices of CI/CD, continuous integration and deployment of code that delivers data from a source to a target, that is pipeline code. And so it's borrowing total quality management best practices, it's borrowing methodologies from agile software development, and it's figuring out how to build and iterate effective pipeline software very quickly. Data ops also involves automating and orchestrating workflows. So figuring out how to automate a pipeline and then figure out how to orchestrate how those different automated workflows that are a pipeline interact with each other. So you're figuring out how to manage various pipelines and ensure that they interact with each other well, that they interact with applications that consume the data well as well. Data ops has another pillar, which is testing pipelines in development and production. And this really gets into making sure that as you branch a version of pipeline code and put it into sort of a staging area where you're making enhancements to it, and then you'll merge it back into production. But when you branch it, when you enhance it, and after you put it back into production, you want to keep testing those pipelines to make sure that they're doing the right things and still delivering timely and accurate data. Now, the data catalog can help this process, and I think it plays a foundational role in data ops. In fact, I would go so far as to say that data ops initiatives really can't succeed without a catalog. It can provide inputs and capture outputs to guide all these steps. You can handle your pipelines and view them, pipeline code within the catalog. You can make more intelligent decisions about how to automate and orchestrate them because you have a central view. And you can also ensure that your test results, which might relate to pipeline code, might relate to data quality, is all available to you through the catalog as well. So catalogs are offering an important reference point for data ops initiatives, which, as you can see, contribute to data governance. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so organizations that get this right can create new levels of analytics value. They can help data scientists, as an example, have higher confidence in the quality of the data that they're analyzing, which helps make more accurate machine learning models, reduce the risk associated with that. They can also help with agility. So you can have the ability to spin up a new analytics team within a given business unit more quickly because they've got that ready reference point of the catalog that'll show them what assets are available to them. There's also the element of improving data access. So data democratization is a trend I mentioned before, and it's important as you bring more users to bear on this data and improve access that in fact you are governing that and reducing the risk associated with it. And the final two here about efficiency and productivity. The efficiency means that the catalog is helping improve, among other things, data quality and reducing the risk of duplicative and contradictory data sets that start to gum up the works. You can also improve the productivity both of the people managing the supply of data and the people demanding or consuming the data. So implemented well, a catalog can help governance programs increase the upside of data and decrease its downside. So I'll pause here. I've been talking a lot, and I would invite thoughts from Lewis as well. I think there might be a couple of items that I glossed over that he was going to contribute to.
No, I really appreciate that, Kevin. I think that so much of what you're saying is sort of hitting the nail on the head. And one of the things that I think we've seen, and I'm going to be digging into it more when I start kind of talking, is that idea of implemented well, you get these benefits, right? So many people have been adopting data catalogs, but not necessarily seeing the rise in productivity, the rise in advanced analytics that they would expect, given the infrastructure that they've got deployed. And I want to talk a little bit more about why that might be the case. But one thing that you mentioned that I think is really interesting, really worth sort of digging into, is that idea of continuous automated integration of metadata into the model. And it only really works when it's not done on an ad hoc basis, right? Because things like qualitative scores, things like who's using the data, that needs to be automatically gathered by a catalog solution so that it can be served up as a way to discover more and additional insights as you're using the catalog. So it sort of ends up feeding itself a little bit and becoming more useful over time, which doesn't work if you're doing it sort of in a manual way. And I think that what we really saw recently was, Gartner changed that idea of metadata management to active metadata as the goal. And that idea of activity and automation is really core to this entire thing working properly.
Lewis, those are great points, and I agree with all that. I think we actually have a report coming up about metadata governance that I think is will help advance the conversation as well, because what we find is that organizations are realizing metadata is very important, and there's a similar set of governance capabilities that actually need to be provided to metadata itself in order to ensure that the metadata is accurate. So good stuff. So what I would conclude with guiding principles here is that what we find from our research working with thought leaders like ThinkDataWorks and also with practitioners is that you should really treat your data catalog as a living and adaptable foundation for governance. And those two terms are important because the foundation implies there's sort of this bedrock that's very reliable, and that's true, but you do need to change. It needs to be a living, breathing entity, because so much is changing on the supply and demand side, and it's important to stay flexible to that, because if the catalog doesn't stay flexible and cannot accommodate, provide governed self-service for new users, they'll simply go around it, and that creates new problems. So we've worked with a lot of companies, and I think a consistent theme is evangelize usage and really get people to use that catalog and stick with it. That means being adaptable as well. As a starting point, if you don't have a catalog, or you're more likely figuring out how to expand it within your organization, I think it's important to identify and exploit opportunities to use the catalog to really improve data quality and address data observability. And also put this in the context of a data ops initiative, which at the end of the day is intended to improve the accuracy and the timeliness of data delivery. Cataloging can help there, and you can sort of raise the ability of the catalog to help those things and start to talk about it in those terms with executives. The final point here would be to, when you need to roll up your sleeves and figure out what catalog you're going to use, define evaluation criteria that align with your governance objectives and policies. Breadth of support for an ecosystem is one factor. Another's ease of use, and I think a third one is the ability to really enable data observability in particular. So if you can make the data catalog your nerve center for governed data consumption, I think that enterprises can increase the odds of success with data to help make it more of an asset and less of a liability. So those are the thoughts I have. I'm looking forward to hearing from Lewis about ThinkDataWorks' perspective. I think we're taking questions at the end. So over to you,
That's
Lewis.
fantastic. And I think that leaves us in a really good place, because talking about the people who have already adopted a data catalog solution is somewhat different from talking to people who are exploring it for the first time. And I'm hoping that the next sort of 10, 15 minutes, I can start to talk a little bit about more in the market why early adoption of data catalogs may not have shown the level of success or increased automation or analytics that we would sort of expect, given that the infrastructure is in place. And it does come down to this idea of needing to have multiple stakeholders using and integrating and evangelizing the use of the data catalog. And so we're going to give you some sort of tips and thoughts about how to get that right the first time without sort of going through a painful integration and then having it not result in what you were expecting. One thing that I want to sort of just say off the bat is it's interesting that given the current economic climate, we're still seeing that data investments are increasing year over year for most organizations. And the reasons for this should be pretty obvious. I mean, the data is a competitive advantage, and most people, if they're not afraid of someone else eating their lunch, they are sort of aware that this is a way to get ahead in the market by using data effectively, becoming a data-first organization, and really staying ahead of the curve. The other part of this that I think is really germane to the conversation we're having right now is the regulatory landscape is shifting underneath our feet. And what was good governance 5 years ago is not good governance today, or there's just been sort of consistent augmentation of the standards. You mentioned GDPR, CCPA. We're going to see more and more of these things coming out. And the way that we've handled data in the past might not be the way that we're handling data tomorrow. You also mentioned PII. That's something that most organizations are aware is a growing issue. And a lot of organizations have a lawful basis to be managing certain types of PII, but only within certain teams or certain people, not organization-wide, and certainly not on someone's sort of local machine, right? So I think that having a way to control effectively the data assets in your organization is going to be super important. And then the third sort of point here is a focus on sustainability is really driving investment, whether that's sustainability in the broader sense of making sure that your data supply chain is taken care of, or making sure that you're investing in organizations that are sort of reducing carbon footprints and things like that. The point is that you're seeing this huge increase in data investments year over year. And that has resulted in most companies sort of seeing some data-driven decisions to realize business value some of the time. The other side of that is that most organizations are not using data to achieve business value all of the time, right? It is something that's done on a relatively manual ad hoc basis. And what we've seen over the past couple of years is that year over year, fewer companies, not more, are saying that they're data driven. And I'm going to be digging in the next couple of slides into why that might be the case. 3 reasons why we're sort of seeing that happening is a lack of collaboration between business and technology leaders. Data catalogs and data is historically owned by IT departments. And IT departments are great sort of ecosystems for data science and development, but they might not be fully aligned to the business prerogatives that and the strategic objectives of the business. So there's a culture misalignment as well. And business analysts who are becoming more and more data science savvy aren't able to access the data they need in order to drive business value. So governance has been inherently very restrictive. I think what we're going to talk about a little bit later is that governance can be restrictive. Obviously, it can be used as sort of a way to close off data access. But governance also, if done properly, can make sure that people who have a lawful basis to use data have access to it and know where to find it and can start plugging into it without sort of just opening up the doors and letting it be a free-for-all, which obviously we know we can't do. The result of all this is that you get this one-off analysis, what I'm calling sort of the time to insight is long. And what happens is that business users sort of chuck an idea over the fence and then get something back from a data engineering team weeks or months later. That's not dynamic, and that's not a way to sort of automate insight. So if there is investment and we're not seeing the level of insight coming back, where is that money going? And I think that if you look at this sort of graph over on the right-hand side here, there's a few things that I want to pull out from that. Primarily that there's a huge focus on extracting additional value from data. 10 years ago, this graph would have looked wildly different. It would have been a lot of infrastructure costs. It would have been sort of maybe more cloud migration strategies, things like that. But right now what we're seeing is there's this focus on extracting value out of what we already have. And I want to pull out 2 things from this: breaking down silos and appointing data translators. This new sort of business term for data translators are driving a lot of investment. Both of those sort of speak to a need for business and technology units to start to be on the same page and to democratize access to both these groups on equal footing. Another sort of second thing that's driving a lot of investment is this need to apply governance. You can't have a Wild West approach when it comes to data. You need to have your system set up and have an observability layer on top, as Kevin was alluding to. And then the final point, which I think is sort of interesting to look at, is this idea of scaling teams and processes. The problem that I find with this of just we can always hire more data engineers is it's not really attacking the symptoms of the problem. It's just saying, okay, well, if it takes 20 people to come up with one solution, I hire 40 and then I'll get 3. So I think that really what you want to do is create a system that becomes very automated, self-driving, so that you can get more value out of the people you've got rather than needing to hire a whole new team. Flexible governance is the idea that it's removing the idea of single ownership of governance. Now, for a lot of people, this might sound, somewhat maverick, but really good governance policy needs to be supported by a technology that allows you to apply those governance principles. So on the left-hand side here, we have sort of the ideas of rigid governance that are generally sort of applied. And then on the right-hand side, we have this flexible governance. Now, rigid governance might be governance is owned exclusively by IT. The policy and enforcement are written by the IT department, and then there's a person sort of in the IT department who is in charge of handing out data assets. They are the single point of failure for all data. And this is a very rigid approach. It means that very few people have access. Data centralization, access limitation are sort of the byproducts of a rigid governance model where you're seeing a lot of people sort of pulling data into one place or trying very expensive sort of migratory patterns with their data. And then you've got a lot of manual integration and deployment, which is inherently an ad hoc process, which ultimately leads to a pretty closed system. In flexible governance, you see this idea of sort of federated ownership. The people who own the data assets are in charge of how they are distributed. The policy might be collective. It's not just owned by IT, but it's owned by several different parties, so that your policy is really being supported by business use cases and real world strategic objectives. Enforcement is also sort of role-based. It can be, I can be the owner of my data asset and then I control who sees it. You can be the owner of your data asset. Teams have their own ownership, things like that. And then the access is centralized in a flexible governance model rather than the data. So you're virtualizing all of the data sets into a central repository to provide that sort of observability layer. And then with all of that, you start to get automated integration and deployment, the CI/CD stuff that Kevin was sort of mentioning, all because you have treated this like an open system. The idea here being that without this flexible governance, organizations are going to struggle to scale their business practices and their data practices at the same time. I'm seeing some questions here in the chat. I'm probably going to just roll through and then we're going to try to come back in a bit. So apologies if it doesn't look like I'm paying attention. We absolutely will have time to get to these in a minute. So as Kevin sort of mentioned, there's three things that are being done that will really support data policy moving forward. And I like to call this sort of people, process, and technology. All three need to work together. No technology is going to save you if you don't have the people and process in place. But you also do need to have technology that will support the process and the people that you've got. You know, there are three sort of legs of the stool. All of them need to be working in tandem together. And I think that what we've seen, and we could talk a lot about this, but I think what we've seen over the past decade is that a lot of organizations have spent a lot of time developing policy. And then when you enforce that policy into an established infrastructure system, it breaks because the policy was designed by people who are thinking about policy, not thinking about technology. And for any kind of governance initiative, you need in equal measure rules and tools. So the rules that you want to apply and then the tools that will help you apply them. In terms of people, most organizations have a really robust sort of data science division. They've got people who want to be using more data, and there's this frothy interest to get more access to information. And you need support for this transformation from top down. I think the evolution we want to see with people is that data scientists have been this division that have been tasked with everything for a really long time. And I think we want to bring data scientists into the fold of understanding business prerogatives and business objectives a little bit more. At the same time, you want business people to become more dangerous data scientists. You know, I think that there's a new type of user who is the BI analyst with some data science credentials who can actually go and start to model data a little bit. The issue there is one of access. You don't need all of your business people to have access to your cloud platform. You want to have a centralized place for everyone to access the data they're allowed to use, though. In terms of process, you really want to establish a culture where data analytics and cloud strategies are aligned with your business objectives. I think a lot of these were designed, as I said, sort of in a black box. The one hand didn't know what the other was doing, and we're starting to see that impact the overall value of your data initiatives. So really what you want to do here is align your data governance with flexible governance toolkits to let business users come into the fold. And then finally, technology. I think that the easiest way to say this is move from a closed system to an open system. And open here not meaning it's a free-for-all, but it isn't a single throttle point for all of the data moving through your ecosystem. It should be integrative, and it should provide that observability layer that enables things like data ops. So data catalogs are the solution for this. I think that what they do is they sit in between and on top of your storage. They slurp up all of data and metadata in an automated fashion. They make it very easy to search through, find this data, manage the metadata, get sort of drop-down governance from the cloud, or apply governance within the catalog itself, where you're virtualizing the data so it's not moving anywhere. You're profiling it so that you're monitoring it for changes every step along the way. And then you're integrating it into your BI toolkits or your analysis, however you want to use it. It shouldn't be sort of a one-size-fits-all approach. It should really be however your team wants to be using the data, whether that's Power BI or Jupyter Notebooks, it doesn't really matter. You need to access the data, you need to be ensured of its quality, and then you need to start to plug into it. And I think that data catalogs can be sort of an esoteric concept for people who haven't spent a long time thinking about them. But really, we understand fundamentally that you need to index information in order to find it well, right? And we sort of use the analogy of a library here. If you just had a library that was filled with books, but they weren't in any recognizable order, and there was a very draconian librarian who was in charge of everything, you wouldn't get access to the information you needed in order to do what you wanted to do. So it should be an open system where you can find things for yourself. And then if you can't use it, you need to know that. All of this stuff needs to be opened up. So that would take us to a platform demo. I do want to pause here before I go into the demo to check in with the Q&A so that we can potentially answer some things before they come up. So Kevin, can you see the Q&A section? And is there anything there?
I can, yes. Okay, so one question is, will we share the presentation after the webinar? Yes, yes, we will. The second question is, where does data ops sit in an organization? Is it part of the CDAO or IT? So I can take a swing at that and welcome your thoughts as well, Lewis. Yeah. I think there are different, there's no silver bullet approach, and it'll vary by organization, but generally speaking, it's an IT discipline. It's about data delivery. It's involving a lot of data engineers in particular, and therefore data ops makes sense if the people managing it and executing it are doing it as part of IT. With that said, they need to be very closely aligned with the CDAO, perhaps through a dotted line arrangement, and also and the data ops best practices should feed into a center of excellence, which is something we advise from a consulting perspective to help people ensure that consumers are aligning with best practices that fit and meet the needs of data suppliers as well. Lewis, if you have thoughts on that, great. There's another question here as well, if not.
Yeah, no, I think that that's a really valuable question. And I think that historically the answer has been it sits with IT. I think increasingly we're seeing the emergence of the CDAO sort of department organizational structure to be the owners of this. And I think that one of the reasons we're seeing that is because of this need to align it with business strategy, whereas IT has been somewhat sequestered from the business objectives. They're trying to align it with this other group. I was just speaking at a CDAO conference a couple of weeks ago, and there's a lot of people thinking about this exact question. So yeah, very important sort of consideration. I can see it either way.
Excellent. Hey, so okay, next question from Andre. I'll mispronounce your last name. How long should a data catalog project implementation take, or how long can it take? Lewis, I'll dish that to you.
Yeah, thanks. I can tell you that we talk to a lot of people who are in year 3 of an implementation and not seeing the results. It shouldn't take that long. You should be able to measure success pretty quickly. My perspective is that an initial data catalog implementation should be something as simple as let's index our data assets and then understand what departments are using them to try to extract more value from the external data we're purchasing, the data that our own teams are using, things like that. You can get ROI in 3 months if you do that process properly. The next phase, which is sort of what we're talking about here, which is actually piping real sort of pipelines of data and analyzing it in real time and reporting on data usage in a broader, more living way, that can take up to a year to sort of really start to ascertain how that's working. But I'm a big believer in the fact of don't try to get to data ops AI on day one. I think that the first stage of any sort of data cataloging process should be get everything into one place, not physically, of course, sort of virtualize data, make sure you've got metadata assets that describe your entire data ecosystem, harvest all that automatically, and then take a good long look at it. And that good hard long look can take a little while, but if you've got the right people who want to ask questions of it, I can't tell you the number of times I talk to organizations that say, yeah, we've got someone who's just maintaining an Excel spreadsheet of like data assets that we're using, and they just go to teams and say, are you using this? That shouldn't be happening right now at this sort of day and age. You should be able to sort of set up an environment that shows you automated insights to do this. So I think that walk to one strategy, it shouldn't take longer than a year to be really driving all this home. It shouldn't take more than a few months to start to see the benefits.
Excellent. Okay, so maybe we'll do, there's another one here. The interaction layer you mentioned earlier, is this in reference to a BI tool or just raw data access? Lewis, why don't I hand to you, and then you can swing into the demo.
Yeah, for sure. I think I'll answer one more, and then we'll go into the demo, just because we want to be cognizant of time, and I want to make sure that we have lots of time to answer these questions as well. The interaction layer you mentioned is in reference to a BI tool. So interaction layer is something that I think we should dive into a little bit more. There's a couple different ways for me to take that question, and maybe you can provide more context in the chat and we can get back to it. But I think that there's two ways we want to do this. We want to make sure that business users who don't need access to the raw data or access to your cloud can at least sort of analyze and find data assets that your organization owns, even if it's just a sample, even if it's just the metadata of that data set, to be able to find out where it is. That's how they should be able to integrate with the entire data catalog. Not necessarily that you need to give everyone the keys to the car, because for governance reasons, that's a terrible idea, but you should be able to give everyone access to what they are allowed to have access to. Now, the other end of that conversation is that where the data comes out to, you should be able to pipe it directly into BI tools as needed. And that can be done through APIs. And it has to be an API-based vascular system like that, where everything's just sort of flowing very uniformly. Anything that's too that requires a third-party software is probably something you should be worried about. I'll take a pause there. Let's get through the demo really quickly, because I can show what some of the stuff we're talking about is. It's great to see how much the chat is lighting up, because I really think that there's a lot we want to get to. So I'll try to do this in under 5 minutes, and then we can spend the rest of the time answering some of these questions.
Sounds good.
Let me just share my screen here.
Lewis, while you pull it up, I'll say this is the first time I've had a friend that I know in the question. Hi, Lou. Good to see you. So we'll answer Lou's question.
Not me, though, I'm guessing. It's a different Lou. We've got
you're a friend too.
Dueling Lou's. Okay. So, I mean, this is the way that we've sort of considered this. This is the ThinkData catalog platform. And as I mentioned off the top, we sort of evolved out of the open data space. And for years, we maintained sort of the world's largest catalog of open data, which gave us some really good sort of bona fides in what it is to manage a variety of data that's coming at you at different frequencies. It's in a variety of formats. It's very difficult to manage and handle. All of those lessons sort of consolidated together to bring about our data catalog platform, which we used internally to manage all of our data assets. And then we just sort of took that as something we could deploy for our partners. The first part of any data catalog should be the ability to find any data that you're looking for, and find it critically sort of based on any metadata that exists with that data set. And when I say metadata here, it's really important to dig into what I mean. There's so many different types of metadata. There's sort of administrative metadata, sort of where does the data live, who is using it. There's descriptive metadata, keywords, topics, classifications, the name of every property on the data, the contents of the data itself, and sort of descriptive data, like the other stuff that you've added into, structural metadata, sort of what is the overall structure of the schema, how many rows is it if it's tabular data, things like that, you know, the pieces that you need to know. So you should be able to search not just sort of on keyword, because that'll just lean too heavily towards descriptive metadata, but on every sort of piece of the data in your ecosystem. So let's say I want to look for some data in my data catalog. I want to be able to search for it based on its residency, where it's coming from, where it lives. So I want to look at specific sort of warehouses of data. I also want to be able to search on other things like, okay, what team is this data set shared with? Who owns this data set? So I can go in and look for all the data sets owned by one specific team. I can also sort of look for the structural elements of the data set that I want to find. So let's say I'm actually looking at tabular data set. I'm just going to do something simple here, but something that's sort of more than 100 rows of data. And then something that is sort of more descriptive. I want to look for anything that has a person's phone number in it, because that might sort of break some governance protocols that I have. So let me just type this in, phone number. And what I get is I've sort of got refined my search based on all of these combinations down to a couple data sets in my catalog that I have access to. And you're seeing here what these data sets are and where they're matching my search terms. So matching based on column title, I'm guessing that's probably the phone number, the column description, same thing, and then the warehouse that it's in the right warehouse location. So I can go into here, and then the first thing I want to be able to see is all of the metadata associated with this data set. I want to see it in one place. I want to be able to quickly ascertain where's this data set coming from, who's using it, all of this information that's very critical to me. So I can sort of look at who's using it. I can identify the schema without even looking at the data itself. But looking into this, I can see that there's a bit of information in this data set that might be potentially sensitive. Seeing something that looks scarily like a social security number. And this is a synthetic data set. Let's not be too serious about this. But then if I want to sort of dive into the data set itself, I can quickly sort of jump in and I can see sort of that I've been granted access to this data set and I can actually query it directly. And this is one sort of different approach that we've taken as an organization, which is that you're not just looking at the metadata, you're actually able to query the underlying data itself. And we've built an ingestion pipeline that sort of was built on the open data movement. So it can handle and automatically restructure messy data, but also you should be able to virtualize data directly from the warehouse into the platform without it changing location, which is a functionality that we also provide. When I'm looking at this, I can sort of do a quick look at the data set. And critically, I can also sort of send this data set to other people. I want to be able to distribute using the platform itself. And I can share the data set in its entirety. But as we've already sort of noticed, there's elements of this data set that are potentially sensitive. So I can create a derivative sort of version of the data set by removing a couple of columns. Let's say, also say greater than a certain amount. And so I'm sort of refining the data set down, but I'm not modifying the underlying structure of the data set. And then I can share it to my entire organization if they have access to it, or I can share it to a person just by adding their email, or I can share it to a specific team. So I can just go to a bunch of different teams and share them that tiny frame of the data that I've put together. I can even limit how many rows that you have access to so they can just see a sample of it. And if I ever want to modify those grants that I've sort of provided, I can go in here and, sorry, Connor, actually, I'll just take it away from Nico. I can remove people's access as needed. Now, the last part of this, and then I'll shut up and we can get to questions, is that once you do all of this activity, you've diffused data throughout your organization, you've made sure that everyone who needs access to it can access it. The next thing you want to be able to do is monitor it. Monitor who is accessing the data, how it's modified over time, how it changes. There's lots of functionality around this, but for the purposes of this, I'll just show that you can go in and see all data set activity over a period of time. Right now, I'm just looking at the past 7 days, but if I wanted to look for all sharing activity, I can say, I want to look for all of these over the past year, and I can see everything that's happened. It seems like there's a lot that happened in August, so I can just sort of remove a couple of these, look at all shares created in August, and there's one very busy day in August 8th where a lot of people got access to this data. This is the type of thing that as a governance person, you really want to be able to dig into and start to ask questions of your data catalog, not just about how it's being used throughout the organization, but also how it's being modified, who's changing the underlying metadata or data asset, which of course you can do. So that's just a very quick sort of meditation on how we've sort of approached this. But I'm very interested to get back to the Q&A and the chat that we were having before.
Good stuff. Okay, so Lou, my friend Lou, is this limited to structured data, or can this model be applied to unstructured data such as papers, journals, and other docs in an enterprise? I'll provide the generic answer, which I think very much a catalog should handle semi or unstructured data, especially to support data democratization. I had that wheel that showed document management as a key aspect of what governance need to touch. But Lewis, why don't I let you address that from a ThinkDataWorks perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's something that's super critical. A data catalog should be different from a Dropbox, let's be honest. There are different functionalities, but I do think that you should be able to support unstructured data in terms of PDFs and even video files, it doesn't matter. But you do need to be able to collect all the metadata associated with these things. And that's what's really important. The sort of opposite side of the question you're asking is it should be able to also sort of support a model, a database, things that aren't the tabular data set that I was showing, which is obviously just a very simplistic example. So yes, a data catalog should support any kind of data, any kind of information asset that you have should be able to brought in and be monitored by this.
Good. Okay, so Lewis, I think a number of these are getting specific to ThinkDataWorks, which is a good thing.
Sure.
Can raw SQL be used to query the data sets?
Yes. Very easy answer. In terms of timing, I'll just say absolutely yes.
Is the platform built on a relational framework or semantic graph? If the latter, can one query using Spark SQL?
Yeah, so is it built on a relational framework? These are the sorts of questions that I'd absolutely love to dig into in more detail. If you want to reach out, we can talk about the actual underlying infrastructure that we use. For the people who sort of aren't more technical on the call, and including myself, we'll probably sort of come back to that, but it's a relational framework.
Very good. Okay. How is it different from Click, Tableau, Power BI, etc.?
Yeah,
so the BI layer.
Yeah, the way I look at that is that's the BI layer. So the data catalog is the place to slurp up and harvest all of metadata and your catalog assets directly from your cloud environments, you databases, wherever you're sort of generating data. That goes into something like a data catalog, and then you plug the data from the data catalog into Click or Tableau to run business analysis. Now, the reason it's not sort of trying to inject itself, what it is it's the observability and governance layer that sits on top of your warehousing to then serve it into the BI layer. So it's the step before, which is really critical because I think that a lot of people just get access to a data set and then plug it into Tableau. That's fine. But you should be able to feed yourself a little bit more. And a lot of business analysts spend a lot of time reaching out to IT saying, can I see more data? Can I access more data to use in these great tools?
Very good. So we'll keep them coming here. Do you keep the data too, or only the metadata? How did you retrieve the data if you only keep or hold the metadata?
Yeah, so we don't keep anything, to be honest. So the way that we set this up is on sort of, your own deployment. You would set up your own storage, and then it would be pulling in the data through data virtualization. So it's not actually migrating the data at all. It's just creating a lens through to it. And then it's pulling in the metadata in the same way. So it's sort of generating that as an asset that you can then query. And so the second part of that question is, how do you retrieve the data if you keep holding? No, so you do actually retrieve the metadata, the data itself, but there's 3 different ways of doing that using the platform. The way that is sort of top of mind for most people right now is data virtualization, because it adheres to most data residency requirements, which is, in order to gain the benefits of a data catalog, I don't want to have to change the location of all my data assets to a central repository. So data virtualization is very top of mind for a lot of people. We also didn't want to force people into data virtualization if they didn't necessarily have something like, BigQuery or Snowflake or Vertica sort of set up. So what you can also do is you can pull in data directly into your AWS bucket, your GCP, it doesn't really matter. Or if you've got a bunch of data analysts who all have a bunch of files sitting around on their local machines, you can drag and drop them in, they'll run through our ETL and then make themselves available. Again, please reach out to sort of follow up on that one. I'll go down to Shannon's question here. Does ThinkData support the automated enrichment of data assets such as tagging with business names, definitions, applying classifications based on preset rules, etc.? Fantastic question, Shannon. Yes, is the answer. So enrichment, we take a couple different approaches for. We have, not the purpose of this demo to show this off, but we have an enrichment pipeline where you can actually integrate with third-party APIs directly through the platform to enrich your data set. So something like Google DLP to automatically sort of redact and hash PII on the platform, or even, a simple example is like the Google Maps API. If I want to start pulling in Latin long, things like that. So we do that automatically. We also do it through services. We used to be sort of more of a data services organization, and we work with a lot of organizations that say, okay, I want to enrich this large data asset with third-party information. We've got a large partnership network, and we do that ad hoc as well. Classifications based on preset rules, yeah, that's all available through the platform as well. Can one save data sets generated from the SQL and then apply access to those data sets via an API? Yes, please reach out. We'll schedule a demo to show you how that works. Could you say a bit about using the metadata with the organization's data pipelines from source collection to sharing with organization elements in the larger enterprise? That's a great question. I'm going to take a crack at it. I think that I'd love to dig into a little bit more about what exactly you mean here. The thing that we want to establish is two very discrete and distinct ways of pulling metadata into the platform. One is an automated harvesting of all metadata from all your data pipelines on a go-forward basis. So it's just consistently bringing in metadata that is then surfaced through that search index that I showed. We also, on the other side, want to be providing a very bespoke and configurable way to adding additional metadata assets through the API or even through the UI onto any data asset so that you can add any kind of ontology to a data set as required to increase sort of that governance, that base governance for your organization. So if I'm an organization that has specific ontologies for specific departments that I need to adhere by, you can create those through the catalog and then append them to data as they come in. Now, some of those pieces of that ontology might be automatically gathered when you integrate with the catalog. Other pieces of it might be something where you're just assigning the data set to its specific team or assigning the license cost, things that might be a bit more ad hoc, but you want to be able to do both in equal measure. Okay,
So we
Bill,
can keep just a time check. We're at 3 o'clock, but I think if folks want to keep going, I'm happy to do that. Lewis, if you don't have a hard stop.
Yeah, I mean, I'll sort of say to anyone who needs to drop, thank you so much for coming. It's been great to chat. Please do reach out if you have any further questions. I'm more than happy to stick around and continue to answer questions. So
Good.
anyone who needs to jump, thanks for joining.
Thank you, everyone. I hope everyone has a great fall day.
Thanks all.
Okay, take care.
Bye.